Okay, folks, before I get into a couple of bill updates for you, I just want to give you sort of an overview of some of the things we're working on right now. We are gearing up. As you know, we have a lot of hearings right now in Sacramento. We've got a lot of bills being amended. And so we're spending a lot of time doing analysis of those bills, as well as just researching the background behind them and trying to understand exactly what they do, make sure there's no unintended consequences that could come from bills that aren't direct attacks, but also deal with and strategize on the bills that are intentionally going after parental rights when it comes to education of our children. And so we have a couple of bills related to that to talk about today, but I also want to just let you know that we have been spending extra time working on just preparing for getting our website, which has undergone an update over the last number of months, and we're really grateful for the folks that have been working so hard on that. We've had both staff and volunteers work on that. We are very grateful for that help, and we're also grateful for just the amount of work that's gone into helping us work on some of the background on legislation, working with attorneys at HSLDA. Will Estrada in particular has helped with doing some research on how our legislation works here in California, what those bills actually mean when they go onto the books and they're directly impacting families. So that's been really helpful as well. So we're grateful for him. And as the process moves along here, we're continuing to be engaged with legislators on a number of bills and asking for more materials to help us understand their bills, as well as continuing to do research on them, and as they continue to get amended, sending in letters requesting amendments, and also showing up and testifying. So I have another bill to testify on tomorrow as well, 727, and we'll just keep on going here, but I would appreciate your prayers as we continue on. Pray for health for us as we move forward, and it's just a crazy time of year, so I appreciate your prayers for all of that, and just for clear thinking and for those relationships at the Capitol that are so important for us to be able to get in to talk to the people we need to talk to, get the meetings, and also get people to really listen enough so that they can understand what our concerns are. And a lot of these folks that we struggle to get an audience with, ultimately we are able to have some common ground with them. So pray for us that we would have wisdom in finding that common ground, because that can be really important in getting our points across and getting them to accept amendments that will protect all of us. So thank you so much, and now let's get into a couple of specific bill updates. Welcome to the Front Line with FPM, where we talk about California politics, homeschool freedom, parental rights, and the family. I'm your host, Nathan Pierce, and thanks for joining us today. Let's jump right in and see what's going on here on the Front Line. So today in the Assembly Human Services Committee, Assemblyman Corey Jackson presented his bill AB 563, which, in his words, is to provide an actionable recommendation to strengthen California's early childhood and care system and allow for smoother transitions into the educational K through 12 system by adding requirements for the Early Childhood Education Planning Council's annual report. Now, this is what the report regulations are going to say after this bill. This is what's editing of the requirements for the report. Specifically, this bill would require the Early Childhood Education Planning Council to report to the legislature, Joint Legislative Budget Committee, and the Assembly and Senate Human Services Committees on the successes, challenges, and gaps in the state's childhood education systems and provide recommendations to advance the state's vision for children, families, and communities. So ultimately, this is a vision setting and a vision executing committee looking and evaluating the state's programs for their vision. The state has a vision for families. The state has a vision for children. That's sort of the first thing here, is the state has this vision, and they're continuing to develop this vision for children, for families, and for communities. And this bill is to put into effect new regulations to require this commission to include in their reports policy proposals for how to advance the state's vision for children, families, and communities. So just think about that for a moment. The state has a vision for your child. The state has a vision for your family. The state has a vision for your community. Now, whether you're looking at this from a biblical standpoint of, what the goal of the family is and who designed it and who casts the vision for the family, or whether you're looking at it from the perspective of just a free country, or maybe you're looking at it from the perspective of the American dream and the individual's ability to start a family, have a family, and raise children, and just live in our society. That is sort of a different perspective than the state has developed a vision for your child. The state has developed a vision for your family. The state has developed a vision for your community. And those are obviously different levels, but when you look at the state's vision for your children, we've talked about this before, it's a whole lot more about management and making sure that they fit with society, making sure that they are not causing trouble while they're in the K through 12 system, and making sure that they get placed properly when they come out the other end of the K through 12 system. The vision is extremely limited in terms of what the vision for children is, what the vision for families is, because it all is encumbered by the role that child or family plays in the bigger picture of the state's vision for what the state wants to do with itself and those that it governs. It's a very controlling mindset. So I don't think that this bill is a very good idea because it continues to enhance the state's vision and the pushes forward the execution of this vision. And so it's something we have to pay very much attention to, because it may sound like it's not that big of a deal, because there's a lot of words in this bill and the proposal around the bill, the discussion around the bill, to talk about making this program work with this program and this program, and getting people together to discuss in a big picture how we can work together and have government more effective. The problem is not that being effective and productive is a good thing or a bad thing. That's not the concern here. The concern is, what's the vision and what are we being productive toward? Why are we trying to get all these government agencies to work together better? It's because we want to execute this vision, and we want to move government in the direction of having more control over the family, the community, and the child. Each individual child, your child, my child. So that's sort of the mindset here. And we'll get into this a little bit more in some of the other bills. If you recall, we had another bill by Mr. Jackson that we posted a video about a couple of years ago that you might find interesting, but there's going to be more on this topic this year because just this week we had another bill by Mr. Jackson. And so we'll be talking about him some more. And this one just gives us a sort of a little look into sort of the big picture, as well as some small tweaking that's getting done on bills that may seem unimportant, but from the big picture view, they're trying to make their big picture vision be executed at a more effective and efficient level. They're trying to make their vision happen faster. And that is a significant concern. So keep checking back and keep watching for the name Assemblyman Corey Jackson, because he's not going away. And for an update on AB 727, AB 2727 deals with student ID cards in public schools, private schools. Actually was heard yesterday on Wednesday in the Assembly Education Committee. And I did see that our request was granted, that with our letter that we had sent in, they actually did approve just prior to the hearing that they would be removing private schools from that bill. So let me just back up and tell you why that's good news. It's good news that they're not covering private schools, private homeschools included, in the requirements for the bill. So the bill now only just applies to public schools and charters, public schools, traditional public schools, and charter public schools. So the issue with that bill, AB 727, is that it actually required a specific counseling crisis number, phone number, to be added onto the back of every student ID card in the state of California. And that phone number is specifically for the purpose of giving counseling for LGBT students. And the service that they wanted to use for that was the phone number for the Trevor Project, which is an LGBT activist organization that also has this counseling service for students in crisis, students that are LGBT specifically, and is designed to help talk to them and counsel them when they're in the midst of a crisis and contemplating suicide. And so that was the argument around this piece of legislation, that those students are not served well enough by the phone number that is currently on the back of student ID cards that counsels students about those that are in crisis and considering suicide. The suicide hotline that's currently on the back of student ID cards, they wanted to add this Trevor Project phone number to the back of ID cards, and so they're continuing to move forward with that bill. It did pass in the Assembly Education hearing committee yesterday. However, it's amended, so right now we don't have the actual language in print yet, but the bill itself, it'll be very soon that we'll have it in print, but the bill itself is supposed to be amended to delete out all the references to private education, private schools, private homeschools out of there, so that it only applies to public schools. So that's a good thing. It's something that the bill, the Trevor Project definitely does not align with pro-family values. According to one of the Muslim gentlemen that testified in committee, it actually encourages students to find a new family and to pull away from their own families. And so it's definitely a pro-LGBT activist organization that they were sending people to. In fact, if you go to the Trevor Project website, the website asks for donations for their advocacy work. And so It's definitely something to be aware of, that this is moving forward in our legislature, and it's a dangerous direction for our state to be going because it's a threat to the family itself. But we are thankful that the part of the bill that addressed private schools, including homeschooling, has been removed or is being removed from the bill. So that's good news. If you want to take a look at this, I have a clip of some of the things that actually happened in that hearing that I thought might be interesting for you. There was quite a discussion about the intent of the author to include private schools and why he thought it was not a good idea to remove private schools, but the committee essentially made him remove private schools from the bill. So take a listen.
And the part about private schools not being taken out of this equation, I frankly think it's wrong. We agreed to the amendments because we want this bill to pass, but private school students probably have it the worst. In Harvard Westlake about a month ago, 10 students committed suicide because they weren't meeting their academic goals or they were LGBT plus. Because folks who said, I'm so afraid about, I'm not going to come home with those grades, or I'm not going to be able to come out to my parents, and they took their life because of that. That's why this bill is here. And those are the schools that need this the most.
Okay, so one other thing I want to address today is the issue of other areas of regulation, other areas of law, whether it's already in the code or whether it's in the process of getting passed through the legislature. Could those other areas impact our freedoms to private only homeschool? Now, I want to address a couple of questions that I've gotten recently, several about each of these examples. So I'll just start with those. One happens to be in California, and that's AB 84, which has to do with charter school regulations, and the other has to do with this bill that's going through the Illinois state legislature. Now, let's start with AB 84 in California. AB 84 is a state law that is in the process of going through the legislature. It came up in the legislature earlier this year and is on its way through the legislative process. The design of this bill is to go after regulating charter schools and basically keeping tabs on state monies being spent in these schools. They want to follow up on the money that the state is sending out to these schools and making sure that they have an account for all the money that the state is spending on charter schools. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this is coming up right now and why it is coming to address charter schools right now. And one of those has to do with the groups that are impacted by charter schools existing in the first place. And one of these reasons has to do with the concern over money coming from the federal government for education in California. There's approximately $8 billion that the California state legislature, the Democrats, are deciding we are not going to meet, we are choosing to not meet the federal standards for men's and women's restrooms, men's and women's sports, things like that in our schools. And so therefore we are declining the $8 billion of federal funds for our schools that are triggered based on whether or not they comply with that particular rule. So that's $8 billion that's an $8 billion shortfall in income that the California Department of Education is going to have to reckon with when it comes to their budget. Now, the California legislature is looking at things much more closely right now in terms of their financial cost in education. Yesterday, I sat for about a little over 6 hours in a hearing, assembly education hearing, a number of bills that have been a concern that we're watching. I'll get into that a little bit later. But a lot of the discussion was a lot heavier on the how much is this going to cost us than I have ever heard before in my 20 plus years of monitoring the Assembly and Senate education hearings. A significant more amount of time was spent on the discussion of how much is this bill going to cost us to implement. And a lot of that has to do with that that $8 billion and other monies that they are concerned that they will not get from the federal government because of the way that they are pushing the certain agendas in California that don't line up with, in particular, the Trump administration, or even historic past laws on the books at the federal level that California does not want to comply with. And that those laws are the trigger point which allows a state to either get the money or not get the money depending on their compliance with federal law. And this is very routine that the federal government sends money to states for certain things and places on that money a requirement that if you take this money, you will be in compliance with these laws. That's a regular practice. It has been for many, many years. And in this particular case, California is choosing to not comply with some of those regulations, some of those strings that are attached to that federal money. And so they're saying they don't care. They're going to just say, we don't need your money. We're going to make this, we're not going to comply with your standards anyway. And we have our own way of doing things here in California. So we're saying no to that federal money because we want to do our own thing. So one of the ways that's coming out is with AB 84 and other laws in California right now that are going through the process. They're saying, okay, we want to be keeping a closer eye on the money that's getting spent in our education budget. But they're also looking at the big picture of what they want to see in education in California, what kind of restrictions they want to see, what specific requirements do we want to see. And so AB 84 and other laws, other proposed legislation are addressing that bigger picture issue of both financial cost for the education budget, and also the big picture of what is the agenda we want to push in our education in California. Since we're already throwing out some of the other guidelines that come from the federal government, what else are we going to aim for? Because we're deciding to not hold ourselves to federal standards as much. So it kind of opens the door for us to say, okay, what do we really want? Let's go for that. And that can come with ideological implications. It can come with a lot of bigger picture worldview based decisions on the education of kids in California. So one of the discussions that I heard yesterday in committee was specifically related to funding and even rolling back or discussing rolling back some of the requirements relating to electric buses, things related to costs spent by the state to maybe do things for the environment in California, but realizing that it's too expensive or realizing that it's not working well. And so we're trying to, the state government is saying via the legislature, we are realizing this isn't working or it's going to cost us too much money. We can't afford to do this. So we're having to scale back on some of this. So there are some thoughtful things that are being forced into the government in terms of how are we going to spend our money, things they maybe didn't care as much about discussing in terms of, well, maybe we should be more careful with how much money we commit to this, or is this really that important to us? So there is some good in that they're having to discuss financial details and do we really want to spend money on this? The problem is that they're choosing to spend the money in ways that I think that are there's a problem with how they're deciding what to spend their money on. For example, there was a significant discussion yesterday on AB 727, which AB 727, you've heard me mention before, has to do with school student ID cards and adding another requirement to student ID cards in the state of California that makes it so that student ID cards must also include a special phone number on the back for students in crisis, specifically LGBT students that are in crisis and considering suicide. It's a suicide hotline specially for LGBT students. Now, originally, this bill was proposed and included all schools in the state of California, including private schools, including private homeschools. So if you, as a homeschool family, create ID cards for your students, or you get your ID cards for your students somewhere, whether it's from your PSP or from someone that helps you make those ID cards, the new requirement would be, under that proposed law, that your student ID cards would have to have written on the back a special phone number for this counseling service, this LGBT student counseling service. Now, the bill was officially announced that it would be amended to exclude private schools, including private homeschools. From that, I think that's a good step in the right direction, and we didn't want that requirement on private schools or private homeschools. I think it's still dangerous for our society to go in that direction of having that number and that information about that organization on the back of every student's student ID card in public schools and charter schools. But that's what the law currently says as written. So it did pass committee as amended yesterday in the Assembly Education Committee, so that's moving through the legislature right now. And that bill, AB 727, is going to be headed to its next committee soon. And we can just be aware of the fact that that bill is going to cause some cost to taxpayers in California, because they're going to have to reprint a bunch of student ID cards in California, including redesign the back of those cards, which seems like it might not be that big of a deal. But student ID cards, which are printed on they're typically for public schools, they're something that's pre-printed, and so they're going to have to reprint all the pre-printed cards so that they so that they can be in compliance with the law with this new requirement. So there is going to be some cost involved in that. Ultimately, that's what a considerable amount of time was spent on in committee yesterday. There's some other bills that came up. We may get into that later on, but just know that there's sort of a big picture struggle right now over cost in education hearings right now. Typically, those discussions of cost get saved for a fiscal committee. There's two types of committees in the legislative process. One is the policy committee, where they decide, is this good policy? Is this the policy that we want to pass for our people in the state of California? And so there's a bunch of policy committees. There's the education committee, which is a policy committee. There's the public safety committee, where they decide public safety policies. There's a number of other policy committees that address a wide range of issues. And then there's the fiscal committees. And in the Assembly, you have the Assembly Appropriations Committee, where they determine, okay, we've decided we want this policy in California, but what's it going to cost, and how much can we afford to pay for this bill? And sometimes bills get passed, actually very commonly, bills get passed through the policy committees as this is a good policy. They go to the Appropriations Committee, and the Appropriations Committee decides, you know what, we understand this is a good policy that we like. I'm not saying I like the policy. The Appropriations Committee decides this is a good policy, we like it. However, we can't afford the whole thing, so let's scale it back. So you'll see a lot of times bills getting to appropriations and either dying there because it costs too much money and they're not prioritizing it, or it gets to appropriations and they amend the bill and take out a whole bunch of stuff because it's too expensive, and they pass a small version of that bill. So typically that's how it goes. Policy committees deal with policy, appropriations committees deal with appropriations. However, right now there's sort of a heightened awareness of the cost of every bill, and so those questions are being asked in policy committees right now about the cost of these bills. So In some ways, that's a really good thing that they're considering that. In some other ways, I think it's sort of telling to see the state of the public school systems in California. I mean, nobody argues that our public school systems, we have difficulty in our public schools in California. They're doing poorly, and that needs to be addressed, but it's not high enough on the priority list to address that. There's ideological issues that are being pushed. There's agendas being pushed that are higher on the list for many legislators than some of these cost savings issues, or even than what's best for students in terms of them doing well. So fortunately, homeschooling is still legal, and so more and more parents are choosing that option for their kids because they realize, A, their kids are safer, their kids are going to get a better education, and their kids are going to ultimately be better off socially, and the ideology of the state is not going to be pushed. As I mentioned before, there's an issue with the ideology of the state coming down from whether it's the Department of Education, whether it's from the legislature itself. There's constant worldview agendas being pushed through the education system in California, and it's not good. It's a priority that those worldview issues get pushed through. It's a significant priority, and it takes place. It takes a higher place in terms of priorities than academics. It's a significant portion of how the education leaders of our state think is a priority in terms of what we need to make sure the kids come out the other end of our system with. And it's an understanding, it's an ideology background foundation that the state wants to see kids exit public schools with when they graduate. Okay, so moving on from that, the issue in Illinois, let me back up. So I started talking about this because I've gotten questions. Can this bill, AB 84, can the issue in Illinois, can those have sort of a bleed over effect? Can they set the stage for more regulation of private education, for homeschooling specifically? And okay, at AB 84, I think, I suppose it could. Any regulation of any education could theoretically lay the groundwork for more regulation for homeschooling, more regulations for families in raising their children. But the emphasis being on funding really helps to understand that they're going after following up on where the money is going and what their money is doing. And so that sort of reinforces the argument that the more we hold steady on not taking government funds for our homeschooling, the more safe homeschooling stays. The more you go after government funds, the more you should, definitely be looking at those regulations that have come to charter schools and to traditional public schools, because that is the motivation. It's, do we have the authority, and can we follow up on our money to make sure that they're doing things the way we want our money to be used to do things? And so when you look at private homeschooling, that money aspect of it is not there. Now, let's talk a little bit about Illinois. The bill that's being pushed through in the state of Illinois is bad. It's dangerous. There's more regulation going on to homeschooling in Illinois through this new piece of legislation. HSLDA is fighting it. So our local group, state organization in Illinois. It's definitely a threat to homeschoolers in Illinois, big time. But the question here is that bill going to pose a threat to us here in California? And the answer that I have for you is definitely, absolutely, 100%. In California, we actually have a lot of freedom. they have in Illinois, they don't currently have to have the annual filing that we do in California in the same way. And yet this bill that's going through the Illinois state legislature does have several aspects to it, including an annual filing, so that you might think, oh, well, they're just coming up to par with us in California. No, the bill in Illinois goes well beyond what we have in terms of restrictions in California. And so Illinois would become a more regulated state than California by a lot. And we don't want to see that happening. We don't want to see our curriculum scrutinized. We don't want to see parents taken out of the driver's seat in terms of how their kids are going to be taught, what books they're going to read, and what subjects they're going to be required to address within the big picture of education. Now, in California, we do have broad requirements for education in California. There's a list of subject areas that must be taught, just like in the public schools. In California, parents must sign an affidavit with the state agreeing that they are going to take full responsibility for teaching those courses, and they're committing to do that. Whether their kid is part of a family-based, a home-based private school, or whether it's that they're part of a bigger school that's overseeing their education. We have requirements in California that are required to be followed in terms of education. And if you look at statistics, you see that homeschool students in California do very well academically. And so that's not really an issue. Academics is not a problem for private homeschooling in California, or for parents choosing that option for their kids. So when you look at the bigger picture, though, and you see this nibbling away at freedoms, or taking huge chunks of freedoms away in Illinois, those definitely set the stage for more restrictions on homeschooling in the state of California. And we should definitely be not just praying for those folks in Illinois, but also looking around us here in California to say, am I ready? Am I engaged? Am I participating in the battle for our freedoms here in California? Because there's constant issues here in California. You may not hear about them all the time, but there are constant issues that we have to deal with to continually monitor our freedom, and the legislature, and make sure that we're on top of all the bills that are coming that may impact private homeschooling. But there's also attacks that are more intentional, and that we have to be ready to fight when they do come up. And if we're not ready when they come, it's too late to get ready. And we need to be ready now, so that when those attacks come, whether it's as a result of people taking what happens in Illinois and saying, hey, we could do that in California, we could even do it better, then we need to be thinking way ahead of that, so that we're ready. We have a robust plan and group and structure of organizations in California. So I would encourage you to think about where your place is in that, and how your group fits into that. I would encourage you to look at the CHIA Support Network. It is a network of groups throughout the state that can coordinate when there's a battle, and because we need that. So I would encourage you to consider where your place is. Can you pray for us? We have a prayer email that goes out once a month asking for your prayer for our organization as we monitor legislation. Can you support our organization financially at FPM? Can you support CHIA? Can you support other organizations? Are you a member of HSLDA, the national organization that they're involved with legislation, but they're also involved in court cases that are really critical to our homeschool freedom as well. So make sure that you're plugged in these different places, and make sure that you're a part of the bigger picture, and you're doing something to be preparing for when that bigger battle comes. So that's what I have to say about those things. So I hope that was helpful to you, and we'll be addressing this and keeping you up to date on more things as more bills go through the legislature and we have more things that we need to take action on. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Front Line with FPM. For more information about the topics we discuss here, check out Family Protection Ministries at fpmca.org and subscribe to our channel.